Joining me now, some heroes of mine. First of all, Andrew McCarthy, former assistant U.S. attorney, National Review contributing editor, and Fox News contributor. And Mr. John Ratcliffe, former director of national intelligence. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for coming on together. We've got a lot of expertise here. Andy McCarthy, I just go to you first. This looks like a cover-up, and I'm going to give the New York Times a whole lot of credit. It was one heck of a story by Peter Baker and company. Scheer was in that story. I mean, it looks like a cover-up. 69 days. What do you make of that?
Well, it takes two to cover up, doesn't it, Larry? I think, yes, the Biden people have not been forthcoming, and I think they like to say that they're being transparent and that they've self-reported, but when you look hard, they haven't actually self-reported, and they're only as transparent as the last leak. But when I say it takes two to cover up, the question here is, what was the Justice Department and the FBI doing during that 68 days that the New York Times talked about? I feel a little funny saying this when you have John Ratcliffe on the panel here, who's much more of an expert on this than I am. But, when Biden's first documents got found, that office at Penn opened in February of 2018. The Biden administration, or the Obama administration, ended in January of 2017, which means those documents have to have been moved once or twice before they got to the Penn Center. And in the intelligence community, when top secret documents may have been mishandled, they have to do a damage assessment to find out, do we have sources of intelligence who've been threatened? Do we have methods of intelligence gathering that have been compromised? Are the bad guys or the bad regimes feeding us disinformation because, unbeknownst to us, our methods have been lost? I don't understand what they've been doing for 3 months. It seems to me like everybody's hair ought to be on fire about this, and they haven't done much of anything.
Well, John Ratcliffe, let's try to answer Andy McCarthy's questions. I mean, what kind of intelligence damage has been done, sources and so forth? And why wasn't there a greater, I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong. Isn't the FBI the counterintelligence agency? Aren't they? Shouldn't they have been in on this from day one? And actually, Andy's other point, I think, Andy, you're inferring that this cover-up actually was much longer than what the New York Times is talking about, that the cover-up may have gone out actually from the day Joe Biden walked out of the White House, retiring as vice president. So, John Ratcliffe, what do you make of this?
Well, Andy presents a good question. I wish I had a really good answer for him. He's right. As far as the national security risk assessment or damage assessment, if you both recall, after the Mar-a-Lago raid, there was a lot of reporting about the fact that my successor as the Director of National Intelligence would be performing that assessment and that would be done swiftly. That was last August. It's now been 6 months, and no one seems to know what the status of that is, which is curious. Now, I'm not surprised that the public hasn't seen that, but last week you had an interview with the heads of both intelligence committees from the Senate and the House saying, yeah, we haven't been briefed by the DNI on that national security damage assessment after 6 months, after everyone's hair was on fire back last August. So a couple of possibilities there. One is that that damage assessment as it pertained to President Trump was not as grave as folks were making it out to be. But the other possibility is that as they were doing that assessment, they didn't realize at the time that instead of just an assessment on Donald Trump, there was going to be a side-by-side assessment as it related to President Biden. And the things that President Trump might be accused of, they were going to have to accuse President Biden of committing the same thing. So that answer, is a curious one that none of us have heard or anyone on Capitol Hill has heard. The other thing I would point out to you, Larry, is it's easy to lose sight. We're now, all of these things get lumped together. We're on what? Document discovery batch number 6 in 5 different locations, and they all get lumped together. I will tell you, the one on Friday is curious and surprising, and I raised my eyebrows when it related to Joe Biden's time in the Senate. And here's why it's significant from a legal standpoint when you talk about intent and inadvertent mistakes and those kinds of things. Presidents, vice presidents, directors of national intelligence, secretaries of state like Hillary Clinton, folks in the executive branch that have national security positions have lots of opportunities to make mistakes because part of their job is to handle those classified national security documents. That's not true of members of Congress. Congress has an oversight role. And the only opportunity that they have to see documents, whether they're in the Senate or the House, is in a secure SCIF. They never have an occasion. As a member of the House Intelligence Committee, I never had the authority or permission or opportunity to ever take a document with me anywhere outside of the SCIF where I was reviewing it. The Speaker of the House doesn't have that authority. So the idea that there's no there and that there could possibly be an inadvertent mistake when it comes to Joe Biden's activities as a senator, it just doesn't add up. This is where you get into those documents had to have left because there was intent by someone to take them from a secured facility.
Well,
there was no accident or mistake.
Well, Andy McCarthy, so what was Senator Biden doing taking classified docs home? And I'm going to rate, what was Vice President Biden doing? Because you're supposed to send them to the National Archives, even as retiring VP. Only the president could declassify. Yeah. You've said that. We've all talked about this. I'm just saying, it looks like Senator Biden took stuff home. He shouldn't have. Vice President Biden took stuff home. He shouldn't have. And then the other question is what Congressman Mike Turner is saying. He's head of the House Intel Committee. Who's he showing it to? I mean, you bring stuff home, you know, like your 8-year-old has a beautiful painting. She brings it home, shows her parents with great pride. What? That was a joke. But I'm just saying, who was he showing what to?
Yeah, we don't know, Larry, and that's a big problem because, you know, the major scandal that we have here is the influence peddling scandal and the millions of dollars that came into the Biden family coffers from regimes, many of which are hostile to the United States, all of which are corrupt. And to John's point about intent, you know, the other thing that I think has been unreported since the weekend is in addition to classified documents, the other thing the FBI took at that search were notes. Now, if that's within the ambit of what they were looking for in connection with classified documents, the only thing I can deduce is he was making notes of secure briefings, you know, classified briefings, or classified documents and taking them with him as well, which you're not allowed to do. So I think it shows a level of willful activity, but also just a sense of entitlement that the rules didn't apply to him.
Well, just before I go back to John Ratcliffe, Andy, I want to get to your first question when we started out. You say it takes two to tango to have a cover-up. So from my understanding of the New York Times reporting, and now other reporting that's going on, the Justice Department and the FBI was a willing co-conspirator, along with his, quote, personal lawyer, and along with, quote, the White House counsel. And I don't know this with certainty, but Ron Klain runs everything else. He's leaving as chief of staff. He was called the prime minister. They had this little coterie in the White House. They sure didn't share it with the press secretary and so forth. But I mean, what, didn't DOJ and FBI cooperate in this cover-up that's now surfacing?
Well, all I can say about that, Larry, is the crime under the Espionage Act that they'd be looking into is the exhibition of gross negligence in the mishandling of classified information, which can include exposing classified information to people who aren't entitled to see it or possess it. The FBI could and should have accompanied the Biden private lawyers who do not have security clearances, yet the Justice Department decided not to have the FBI do that, which means they had to know that they were greenlighting people who didn't have security clearances going to do searches where they expected to find national security information, which itself is gross negligence.
And John Ratcliffe, the FBI and the Justice Department, I want to say this again, seems like they were willing co-conspirators in this cover-up with the White House and the president. I mean, they didn't say anything. They didn't say anything until, I think, CBS got the leak out, January 9th, which was just about 2 months after these events surfaced. I mean, huh? Really? This is our law enforcement? This is our double standard? They sure jumped on Donald Trump pretty fast without any advance warning. How about this one?
Well, I think that's right, Larry. You know, there's so much. You know, I hear the term two-tiered system of justice. I think the DOJ and the FBI are the big losers in this thing because it's apparent, and Andy's done a really good job of laying this out. It's really a two-party system of justice. We have one statute that everyone's looking at here with the Espionage Act, and when you look at how it's been applied to Hillary Clinton, then Donald Trump, then Joe Biden, Democrat, Republican, Democrat. In the case of the Democrats, you know, remember with Donald Trump, what you heard was, hey, you know, if you have probable cause, you execute a warrant, you send in FBI agents, no one's above the law, not even the president, you do it by the book. With regard to both Clinton and Biden, what you hear is, oh, well, they're cooperating, and you know, they've been very helpful, and and so they're applying different rules to folks from different parties, and the bad thing there is the American people see that. They see that there's a disparity in treatment and application of the same laws, and at the end of the day, it's the Biden Justice Department and the Biden FBI that really look bad in this to the American people, and it undermines everyone's faith and trust.
That kind of cooperation is sometimes called a cover-up as well. Andy McCarthy,
By the way, as Andy...
Go ahead, John.
As Andy will tell you, cooperation is not a defense. Cooperation gets you time off of your sentence or recommendation from a prosecutor. Oh. It is in no way a legal defense to committing a crime.
Good point. Andy, just the last 30 seconds. You don't think Hunter Biden, who lived in that Wilmington house for quite some time, you don't think he ever saw those documents?
It looks to me, Larry, like they handled it very, very carefully there. I'd be shocked if he saw them.
Seriously, you're saying seriously? No, you're not. Right. This is Kudlow wise ass humor. No, I get it. I get it right off the top. Absolutely get it. I mean, that's just. I don't know why people aren't reporting on that aspect too. I mean, Hunter's there, the documents are there, everybody's fibbing about them, no one wants to talk about them. You just can't imagine. They're piled up by the chef cure. I got it. Andy McCarthy, who is the newest comedian on our show, and we welcome all of these things, and John Ratcliffe, who remains my #1 spook in life. Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate